Welcome to the Write Better Fiction podcast, the show that helps you, write better fiction. I'm Shane Miller, urban fantasy author, writing coach, and story geek, and each week I'll be talking to industry experts about the writing craft, publishing, and the business of being an author. Enjoy the show. Hello, fictioneers, and welcome to episode 12 of the Write Better Fiction podcast. Today, I'm super excited because I'm chatting to my good friend, critique partner in crime, podcast co-host on the Storytellers Faceoff Podcast, and fellow fantasy author, Cassie Newell, aka the Sassy Writing Coach, about her book, Writer Fuel. Be inspired to start and finish your story, so stay tuned for that. But first, it's time for Question of the Week. I had another answer to the question from episode 10 on creating characters with best-selling romance author Christina Adams. The question for that episode was, who is your favorite fictional character? A. Kincaid said, that's a tough question. I really enjoy Christian Avasarala, and I probably butchered that, from the Expanse series. I will have to add that to my list. And last week's question from episode 11 on how to write a series with best-selling fantasy author Helen Scheurer was, what is your favorite book series of all time and why? Mary Van Everbrook said, thanks for the opportunity to become familiar with Helen and her writings. I'm checking out her book, How to Write a Successful Series. And my favorite series is Orphan X by Greg Hurwitz. Thanks for checking out Helen's book, Mary. You'll love it. It's a great read. And Karen Heenan left this comment on Helen's episode. This was such a good conversation. I recommended your podcast to a friend just getting into the indie author scene because it's what he needs to hear. Thank you so much, Karen. That means a lot. As Cassie's book is all about inspiration for authors, this week's question is, what do you do when you need to be inspired to write? Okay, time for my update from the writing chair. I've written another 5,000 words of Blood Cell, which is the first book in my chosen vampire series this week. And in doing so, I've realized something. I hate writing, and I know that's a really odd thing for a writer to say, so I'll be more specific. I hate drafting. I love the discovery of new ideas, creating characters and settings and doing all the outlining. I love self-editing because I can shape the story how I want it to be before it goes off to my editor and they tell me that I've done everything wrong. And I love working on my editor's notes when I get them back too. But I do hate drafting. If you want to hear me talk more about that and why I hate drafting, and if you hate drafting too, I give some tips on how to make the process easier. I was on episode 178 of the Indie Author Podcast with previous podcast guest Matty Dalrymple. That's the Indie Author Podcast with a Y, not I-E. And that episode was called How to Be a Writer If You Hate Writing. Anyway, what I figured out during this process of writing this novel is that I can write about 3,000 words a day, and the output is reasonable for a first draft. And I'll caveat that by saying these are still first draft words. They're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Anything above that 3,000 words in a single day or a single session, and my brain checks out, and literally everything I write becomes drivel. There's a lot of kind of gaps in the manuscript. I put a lot of this needs to happen, placeholders, and that pisses me off, quite frankly. So 3,000 words a day is pretty much where I tap out. It becomes a state of diminishing returns after that. So if you're struggling because you think you need to hit these awesome big word counts, and after a certain period you realize you're getting tired or the words aren't flowing like you want them to, it might be time to revise your word count or look at your process and see what you can change to make it easier. In other news, I'm at Mark Dawson's Self-Publishing Show Live conference in London this week. My suitcase is actually over there, packed and ready to go. And I can't wait to meet up with all my author buddies, old and new. So if you're going, You can direct message me on Instagram or TikTok and let me know. It'd be great to meet up. If you want early access to episodes and exclusive access to the Fictioneer community on Discord, where you can participate in things like weekly accountability and question of the week, you can support the Write Better Fiction podcast on Patreon for as little as $5 a month. Support the show at patreon.com/writebetterfiction. When I reach 50 patrons, I'm going to start recording a monthly Q&A where I answer all of your writerly questions. Okay, that's about it from me, so let's get into the interview with Cassie. Hello, and welcome to the Write Better Fiction podcast. Today, I'm joined by my critique partner in crime and podcast co-host, Cassie Newell. Cassie Newell is a fiction and non-fiction author, podcaster with me, and graphic designer. Cassie is a certified book coach through the Author Accelerator program. Cassie coaches writers through the Sassy Writing Coach platform. Absolutely fantastic. You can get that at sassywritingcoach.com. And the Writer Fuel community. She has online courses and various coaching services. Cassie is originally from Tennessee, which you'll hear in a moment, where she gained the nickname Sassy Cassie from an early age. She's a nomad from various states and countries, calling home to sunny Florida with her family, where she cheers on her favorite hockey team, Tampa Bay Lightning. Hi, Cassie, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me, Shane, and go Bolts. That's all I want to say real quick for the hockey, but I'm super excited to be on your podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm super excited to have you on my podcast.
Yeah, I'd be, I think, a little offended if I wasn't invited, considering we do one together.
I know. Yeah, I had to ask you, really. I didn't really have a choice.
It was default. I know.
I'm kidding. This is going to be a lot of fun. So to kick us off then, can you tell everyone a bit about you and your journey into writing?
Yeah, so my journey into writing was probably not the traditional one. I had a reading disability at a young age. So writing for me came later in life because I became an avid reader. With the first Kindle coming out, my husband was like, let's save my back from moving books all the time when we're moving. And here's a Kindle, Merry Christmas. And I just was falling in love with different types of stories and thought, wow, I've just been reading the wrong things for me. And I've always been a very creative person. So as a result, I was like reading stories and seeing endings that I wanted differently. And that challenged me. I took some creative writing classes just to dabble and fell in love with it. And lo and behold, I wrote and continued to write and published my very first novel, my debut novel, 2016. I completed that series with 4 books this past April 2022. I also published my nonfiction book here in October 2022 for Writer Fuel, and it just sparked education, learning, creativity, such that now I'm also a writing and book coach and all the things around it. So it wasn't something I would have said early in my life that I always wanted to be a writer. I always think of myself as a creative person. That's my story.
Yeah, that's great. And it's funny that we share a similar journey because I didn't start reading until I was like in my mid-teens. I didn't start writing until much later. So yeah, I'm not one of those writers either that was born with like a pen in their hand and a thirst to write.
Yeah, it came later for me. And I think it's a part of escapism too as an adult. So I think for listeners that have on their bucket list, I want to write a book, or I want to know that you can. It's never too late. So I think that's the message to really receive.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you mentioned Writer Fuel there, and that's obviously what we're here to talk about today. It's a fantastic book for anyone who hasn't read it. But one of the concepts that you talk about in Writer Fuel is name it before you start it. And a lot of people instantly think you're talking about giving your project a book title, but I know that's not what you mean. So can you talk about naming it before you start and why that's so important?
Right. So naming it before you start is really about the inspiration ahead of drafting. So it can be a title, it can be a character, it can be an event, it could be a song, anything that makes it tangible. That is the point of naming it before you start it. The reason why we do this, or I propose you do this, is because it makes it tangible. It's something you can anchor to, something you can change later. So for example, such as yourself, you may want to write a vampire series, right?
Yes.
So you may anchor that around a specific movie or book you like, but know that you're going to change it or adapt it. I also am a very visual person. So sometimes I will see a cover or piece of art or something of that nature that may ground me in something I'm looking to do. So for me, the idea is that naming it before you start it is almost like when you're on a health exercise journey. A lot of times your trainer will say, tell people what you're doing, right? Because it makes you accountable, right? I'm going to go on a health diet, or I'm going to watch this. When you say that out loud, when you name what you're going to do, it becomes tangible. It anchors you to those activities, and it's no longer just a rumination within your brain space between your ears. That's the reason for naming it.
Yeah, that's perfect. And there are two things you said there that really kind of stick out to me. Yes, it can be a title, obviously, but that's not what it has to be. So
Right.
my new series, not the vampire one, the newest one that's kind of snuck up on me out of nowhere, that happened because an idea for a character just popped in my head, and I had her name, I had what she was like pretty much instantly. I ended up naming the series after her, but I had a character to kind of hang everything on. So that you can do it that way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is you can do it any way that fits your purpose. There is no right or wrong. And I think sometimes when you speak to coaches, they have a certain framework for which they want to coach you within. To me, I'm all about the person I'm working with, and I try to adjust that frame as I'm working with you. So I just feel, and it sounds very loosey goosey, I realize this, but if it for you is this one thing, then do the one thing. If you don't know what that one thing is, then work with a coach to find out what that is, right? Because I don't want you to feel like, oh, I don't know what I should name this, and then stop yourself from naming it. That is not the intention. The intention is to have something to anchor it to as quickly as you can, because then you can act on it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And the other thing you mentioned that I wanted to touch on was you mentioned, like, if you're doing a fitness program, your coach will often say, tell people what you're doing, share your ideas. And we've all done those,
Yeah.
and we've all had that experience. So this isn't a question I prepped you for in advance, but what's your opinion of well, I call it a myth because I don't believe in it personally, but what is your opinion of the notion that we should not share our ideas in case they get stolen?
Oh, well, I have, and this is what I love about us, Shane, because I do tend to push you on the
Yes.
status quo of what
Yes, you
you
do.
think I might say, and I do the opposite. And sometimes just out of spite, I must
Yes.
say, because I am sassy. But I have two rooms of thought here. One is, are you sharing your idea publicly or within your community? They're two separate things.
Mhm.
Community is somewhat of tight and secure, whether that be your family, your support system, whatever that is, a writing community. And the second is just public domain. So I feel that sharing within a community should be a non de plume of activity so that you can anchor yourself. Again, it's all about anchoring yourself and holding yourself accountable to get those things done. I think when it comes to publicly announcing what you're doing, that adds pressure to you. It's not that you can't do it, because honestly, I think you can do whatever the heck you want to do. No idea is original, is probably what you were thinking I was going to get to. Yeah, no idea is original nor precious, but I look at it as what it will do for you. Holding yourself accountable in your community is one thing. Sending it out to the public domain is another, that sometimes puts pressure on you to deliver outside of being able to flex and change. So I know we'll talk about that later, because I'm all about the pivots.
Yes.
But nonetheless, I think that when you make the grand declaration of a public notation of what you're going to do, it does add pressure. It does add timelines. It does add certain elements. Maybe if you're towards the end of really getting there and you need that, then do that. I think it's dependent on everyone. For me, I tend to hold back publicly until I'm ready, because I want it to be as close as I am to being finished and actually knowing I'm going to deliver on that. So that's just a me thing.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm only laughing because I do the exact opposite. I've actually like pledged
But I think that
my
has to
entire
do with our
writing schedule.
personalities too, right? Because you're very futuristic, and you see it and you're already achieving it as you're going. And
Yeah.
for me, I need to feel it and be in it before I know I'm going to achieve it.
Yeah.
It's a little opposite.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess talking of like the different types of writers that we are, that brings us nicely to something I know you're a big fan of, which is finding your why. And I've spoken to a couple of my previous guests about this as well. So what is your definition of finding your why, and how do authors actually go about doing that?
I was like, how can I answer this quickly? I have an entire chapter on this. Granted, my book is small and mighty, but why is something where you have to ask yourself some key questions. And for me, some of these questions that I ask within my chapter are, why do you want to write? There's an overarching reason for writing, and also for your particular project. And then go deeper. Like, don't just sit on, okay, the answer is this. It never is just this, and I'll tell you why. Then you need to ask the questions, what will it accomplish for you? If you're unable to do it, what does that mean for you? If it fails, what does that mean for you? If it succeeds, what does that mean for you? And all of these things, you need to go deeper than you think you need to go. I'm a little different from Simon Sinek in that I believe your why can evolve. He does not. He thinks it's just deeper levels of getting there. I conversely am opposite. I think that there are different levels. There's surface level, there's skin deep, and then there's right at your heart. And to me, you want to get to the heart. When I started writing, I had some thoughts around what I was doing in terms of the books I write, which is young adult, contemporary, fantasy. Very much at that time, my daughters were teenagers, and it was kind of wrapped around them. That's not bad, but it was very surface level. It had nothing to do with me at all. Nothing to do with me. So as I kept going, second book, third book, fourth book, it became more and more why I'm doing this. My girls are grown, at this point. So why am I continuing? And it's okay if I'm not to continue, but the answer is that your why should evolve and get deeper and deeper. I don't think why should stop you until you know it. I think it's something you have to continue to dig and find out why you're doing certain things that you're doing, certainly at a project level, but then overarching at a bigger level. Because writing a book, for example, or even if you're wanting to write short stories or poetry, any of these creative activities, is time consuming. So, I know writers that are like, oh, I could be cleaning my house. I could be doing this. I could be doing that. I have, other responsibilities. Well, this is going to take some of those responsibilities. Hopefully, it's a joyous one to do. But at the same time, you really need to work on that because it's something that will sustain you long term versus short term. And for me, it started out very short term until I got further along within my writing journey and my career and within this industry to really understand where I sit. Do I think my why will evolve continuingly? Yes. And I also think what's at my heart and at various levels, like I talked about, skin deep, surface level, will continue to kind of merge into a fully formed why, because I don't think it's something you can sit down, answer a bunch of questions one evening and be like, that's my why. It's an evolving thing. And it's something you go deeper with every time you start to really hash it out.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of authors do freak out about finding their why. Like you see people on Instagram being like, oh, how am I supposed to know why I'm doing this if I don't know my why? But like you said, it's not something you're just going to sit down, bullet journal about for 2 seconds and then, oh, I know what my why is now.
Yeah, exactly. And some people, you may not want to put the work into it. Some people are like, my why is going to change with every project. That's fine. But I also would challenge you to look at what your projects are. What are the themes you're tackling? Because
Mm.
those themes may be closely tied to your why. So sometimes things are very apparent and sometimes they're not. It shouldn't stop you from going forward. It could just be you're driven, you're competitive, you want to complete this particular goal in your life, and you will do it for sure. But long term, if you're like, oh, I want to be a person who has 10 series behind my back and I want to do this full time, I would say take the opportunity to really dive in, because there are going to be times where it's going to be hard. You're not going to want to do it. You may take a break. That's okay. But you need something to anchor you. I know that seems to be my word today, but your why is a comfy blanket and a reason to wrap yourself around as to why you're doing it when you hit those hard times.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And you kind of spoke there about don't let why stop you. So another thing you talk about in terms of not letting things stop you is like kind of starting your first or next project before you're ready. And this was a really refreshing thing for me because a lot of people say, you have to have this solid plan and otherwise you won't know what you're doing. So why should we, in some cases, start before we're ready?
Okay. So to me, creativity doesn't have a limitation of a start line. So I think this is a misconception most writers have. And I even have to remind myself of this, because there's this piece of doubt that will rear its head, um, before you're ready, and it'll be like, no, don't start this, or you have that going on, or what have you. Like it just kind of will hold you back. And I like to look at writing and the various pieces of the process, which I think we tend to forget, as building blocks. So starting is a concept, not of drafting, actually. So that's what I want to clear up really quickly, is that starting is the conception of an idea and building is the next premise. So it's a building block, right? So you have an idea that's a building block, a premise that's a building block. And then before you know it, you may have other aspects to your process for character building, for plot building, an outline. Then you're drafting. Then you may have different types of how you draft within that. And then you're editing. So there are all these little blocks that build. And my point is, a lot of us think that starting is drafting, that it's sentence one, that it's paragraph one, right? And to me, I think we should just get rid of that idea that starting is like drafting. And maybe that is part of your start for an idea. Like you just write down the first paragraph or the first dialogue between two characters. Maybe that is your idea start. But remember, there's an idea, there's a premise, there's these pieces that you're building upon layer, building blocks, Legos. And to me, starting is all about playing with the Legos in the very beginning. I don't necessarily think you need to have an instruction manual to play.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents there.
Yeah. For once, we're in agreement. I actually agree with you. I've never thought I'd say that.
Ding, ding, ding. Let's write it down.
Could you hear the pain in my voice then?
Oh, whatever.
Yeah, it's all good, really. So obviously, I mentioned in your bio that you are the Sassy Writing Coach because you are. So can you talk about what the Sassy mindset is and how authors can develop one?
Yeah. So the Sassy mindset really is around being your own support system in your writing career. It's a matter of, for me, it was finding my battle cry. So what am I, going down the hill screaming? And part of it is my personality, sure. It's a bit of leaning into that. But not all of us have great support systems. I am very fortunate that I have a fabulous support system at home, but a lot of us don't. So to me, the Sassy mindset is how you're framing your rebellion, your battle cry into productivity. It's knowing your why. It's evolving that. It's allowing your story to drive you beyond the fear of even finishing it. It's show the naysayers that you can, because screw them. It's one of those things. It's the Sassy mindset of your bubble and bouncing anything off of it out, because you don't want it to sink in. So it's basically owning yourself, finding your battle cry, and just owning it, living it, and working within it. Simple as that.
Yeah, that's great. And once you've found all those things, I have to say it makes the writing life so much easier.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I started working on my coaching business, I didn't know what it would be called. And it was funny because a friend and colleague was like, I love that people used to call you Sassy Cassie. I was like, well, some people still do. And I was thinking, you know what? Screw that. I'm going to own it. I'm leaning into that. So, I think you just need to find what that is, what your battle cry is. And yeah, I'm one of those people. If you tell me I can't do something, I will find a way to do it. Like that is a challenge to me. That is like laying it down, so to speak. So yeah, I think that's something everyone can kind of utilize within their own framework. And some may not be as robust or in your face as I am. And that's okay too. This works for me.
Yeah. And that's the key thing too. Find what works for you, right? Yeah. Nice. So something I hear you talk about a lot, you've mentioned it in this interview already because you never fucking stop banging on about it, is pivoting. And I'm only joking, by the way. I love this concept, but I know you love a good pivot. So what are some of the situations an author might need to pivot in, and how can they make a successful pivot if they need to?
Okay, so pivoting actually comes down to 3 aspects. So first, I'm going to talk about some dreaded things here. 1 is pausing. 2nd, we talked about a little bit pivoting. And the 3rd is quitting. And you're probably like, a writing coach telling me to quit? What the hell? Well, here's the thing. I think there's no shame in quitting, right? Because practice, everything is practice for better outcomes later. You're always making it. Practice makes improvements. I know we've talked about that forever. But the thing is that sometimes when you have a goal, you can push through a goal and it be wonderful. You can also push through a goal and it be extremely painful. Right? So here is where I think this concept, and I have an entire chapter around this, that I think is important, is for writers. When you're hating your story, it needs to come down to a couple of questions for yourself. Is it you hate the story or the process? Are you stuck? Are you, not finding the time? The words aren't coming easy. That's something else. Is it you really don't like your characters, you don't like the plot, you don't know what you're doing, and what is the purpose of it? That's very different from what I just spoke about. So that's the time to evaluate. Is it time to pivot to a different story? Or is the process so agonizing and you're hating it that you just need to quit? You need a pause. And then from that pause, evaluate whether or not you need to quit. I think from my perspective, there's a lot of monikers out there in sports, don't quit, never be a quitter, quitters never win, that kind of crap. And I call it crap because I think it should be left to the competition of sports. I don't think it should be left in a lot of other industries because failure is success in different ways. Mm-hmm. And I think that quitting or pausing or pivoting tells you something new about your process to change what you're doing in the next project. So for me, for example, and I know a lot of writers do this, their very first novel will never see the light of day. And it's not because there wasn't a goal for that. There was a goal to finish a novel. Doesn't mean it's publication worthy or ready or something you love and want to go through it 100 times over in editing processes, right? So I think that's something to consider. I've started stories and I go, nope, it's not the way it's going to do. In fact, my second novel in the Unwanted series, Rain, started out completely different than how it ended up being published. I actually scrapped it, rewrote it. That is painful. Writers will tell you it sucks.
Yep.
Because it was down, like completely drafted, and I scrapped the whole thing and started over. But I knew it was necessary. That was a complete and utter pivot.
Yeah.
I've started stories. Actually, I started Red, which is going to come out hopefully later this year, several years ago. And I just didn't know what it was yet. Like it was still an idea. It was still kind of in that area that I was working on the premise of what it was going to be creatively. So I paused. And now I pivoted to what it's going to be. So I think that there's lots of things to consider around this. I also had this idea, now I'm just speaking for me, where I was very influenced by another author and I had this fabulous idea. I've had this outline for more than 3 years and I was excited to start it this year. And guess what? I'm quitting. I paused it. I stopped it. Will I return to it? I don't know, actually. I might not. Another idea is forming faster for me and exciting me. So I also think that we put ourselves in a box sometimes around our goals of what we state to our community, what we state publicly, and know that you can change your mind. And that is the key part of pausing, pivoting, and quitting. And they're not dirty words. There should be words to celebrate, to be quite honest. And to know that your readership, they'll pause and pivot with you. Will some quit? Maybe, but they're not your readership. So let it go.
Yeah.
Sassy.
Sorry. No. I agree with you. This is a very strange episode. But
we don't disagree that often.
But no, we don't actually. But I do agree that definitely, like pivoting, pausing, none of those things should be dirty words. So it's kind of like me with the vampire series I was working on, which actually is the very first novel I ever wrote, and it is very painful to go back and edit that. However, I was in the middle of doing that, fully prepared to go back to my book coach and carry on with the process. And I will do that. Like, I've paused it. So
Yeah.
this character for the current book that I'm working on just popped into my head, and I thought, right, I have to do this now because I'm really excited about this. And if I don't do it now, I know I'm going to lose this spark. So it was
Right.
kind of like, this is going to serve my readers better in the long run, because once I've written this, it's all in an interconnected world. I'll understand the world better. This story needs to come first. Then I can really do the vampire novel justice.
Isn't that lovely though?
Yeah.
Like, it just, you had a plan and you're like, okay. And I also think sometimes we don't know the verbiage or the process in which to categorize things. So, you knew you were pausing this, you knew this was coming up first. And now you've got your shuffle, and you've got your building blocks, if you will, in Cassie's little mind. I've got the city over here. I'm building this one. This one's already built.
Yeah.
These are the roads. Yeah, I love that. I think that's fabulous because I think too, as you begin this writing journey, especially for new writers, until you know the verbiage, of certain things, you don't quite know where things are fitting and you feel insecure about it. I mean, I know the first time I went to a gym and they're showing me all these weight machines and pulleys, I'm like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's some insecurity about things you don't know until you start traveling it
Yeah.
and
And
experiencing it.
what I think is great as well is you're not talking about this in black and white terms. You make the distinction between pausing, pivoting, and quitting, because just because you decide to pause now, it doesn't mean you're never going to go back to that project.
Right.
In fact, it might just mean that you need a break from that project, then you're going to go back to it. And like I said about mine, do it justice. But if you do need to quit, there's no shame in that. Like, I still haven't really decided where I'm going to take my first series, or whether I'm going to take it anywhere at all.
Yeah.
It will very much depend on how this next series does, and if I have the bandwidth to go back to it. I'm not saying I've quit it forever, but it's certainly not something that's on the radar this year, for sure.
It's interesting because I have quit things. It's like I actually have a military romance that I wrote a long time ago. It's never going to see the light of day.
Yeah.
It's quit. It's done.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I know it.
Yes.
But there are some other things, like I indicated, there's this one I was very passionate about. I have a fully developed outline. I just don't think it fits me as a writer now. And it's funny because I paused that because I wanted to be a better writer in order to write that story.
Yeah.
And now I'm not sure that's the story of my heart of where I am now as a writer, although I know I could write it better than when I conceived it several years ago. So it may come alive again. Who knows, in some form or fashion, or maybe even evolve into what I'm working on, now, and other ideas. But I just think you need to give yourself some grace and being kind to yourself around these concepts, because I don't feel like everything's black and white.
Yeah, completely agree. Again. So something else that I've heard you speak about before, because obviously we speak about this stuff quite a lot, and this question is selfish because every time you speak about this, it gives me validation to write the things that I actually want to write, as opposed to the things that we're told we should write. So like I said, we've spoken about it before, whether that's on our own podcast or through other channels. But the thing that you talk about that I love most is that you are a B reader who's quite happy to be a B author. And this, I just love this. So what do you mean by being a B author? And why is it okay to be a B author as well?
Yeah. So, okay. In the US, and I assume across, countries and academic institutions, in the US, we have a grading system, if you will, whether you're passing or failing. And it's described as A through F, basically. A, you're excelling. F, you are failing. B, C, D, in between. So it's basically a ranking of success as to how well you are passing something. Or if you're an F, you're failing. D, you're on your way to failing. You're not getting the subject down. And there's also this series of ranking in other industries. I mean, in our own industry, it's like best selling, right? That's what we kind of rank it to. And say entertainment could be the Oscars or the Golden Globes or whatever country you're from. You have these types of awards, or even sports awards, right? Like the Super Bowl rings, things like this, right? So I tend to watch these things and I go, okay, well, they're at the top of their career, right? And sometimes being at the top, I don't know about you, but some bestsellers are not bestsellers to me.
Yeah.
Some Oscar winning movies that get the Academy Award are not my favorite movie that year, right? So to me, it's like, I don't necessarily want to be in that category of running. And I start to break down genres to kind of that piece as well, that the top of the top tend to be more literary. And for me, creativity and writing is all about entertainment. So I am happy to watch a Marvel movie, Star Wars, Star Trek. These are not things that are getting Academy Awards, but I'm entertained and I love it. And I can talk about it all day long. And so for me, that's the type of content I consume as well. In terms of books, I want to be entertained. Sure, I love some themes and things that make me feel emotion. And that is what I will gravitate to. And those will be my favorite things of the year. But to me, B releases the overachiever, so to speak. So if you're coming into this as I want to be this and I want to be that and I want to win these awards and I need to be a bestseller, that overachiever status for my personality is too much weight on my shoulders. For what I want, I just want some rabid fans who dig what I dig and, are entertained by it and enjoy it. So that's it. Yeah. That's me being a B author and a B reader. And it's what I enjoy. If you come at me with some literary piece that has some historical meaning, I'm sure I will read it, but it's not going to be the thing that grabs me, for weeks and months on end, and something I'll want to reread or rewatch or tell all my friends about. Typically, it's just not.
Yeah. And it's great that you apply this to genre, because I had Helen Scheuer on the show a few weeks ago, and she was talking about how when she did a creative writing degree at university, it was very much focused on the literary side of things, and they didn't really talk about commercial or genre fiction. And obviously we both know now that she does write genre fiction. She writes fantasy, she sells a lot of books, but she didn't feel like that was a path that was open to her based on her traditional education. She convinced herself that to be successful, she had to be a literary author. And I mean, we both, at one stage anyway, and we both know that's not the case, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is also the eye-opening aspect of, me reading later in life, because I wasn't consuming literary things that were focused on in my academic life as a little kid or in high school, of, the literary masterpieces that were required to read and break down. I got to read romances. I got to read sci-fi and just, fun things, adventures. I really got into the various subcategories of romance and all of those things, right? Because that's not something when you're younger that was, or in my age group, that was really brought out. Now, I'm sure younger generations are going, okay, well, Harry Potter's there, Twilight's there. You've got Brendan Sanderson, who's in YA now. Like a lot more opportunity than there used to be for kind of that readership at a younger age. But I think until you get to really find your genre that you just cannot put down and you consume a great deal of, it's difficult.
Yeah. Definitely. Okay, so if you then had to choose your favorite method of generating new ideas, because we've spoken about ideas quite a lot, what would it be and why?
Oh my God, this was like the hardest question. I was going, oh, what is it? So I consume so much in various types of format. I am a very visual person. I know
Mhm.
that about me.
Me too.
And art and music will motivate me, like just the right line, the right beat, the right feeling, even. Um, it can be very abstract for me, and I can make my own story out of something. So I'm very contemplative in nature as well. So that's what can drive me. It's funny because I enjoy watching like The Voice and tryouts, and like um there was this other show where they were doing songwriters and
Mhm.
them like working with coaches, and like that stuff drives me. I love the whole process of it, and it will motivate me. Like a saying, I can see something on Instagram, if you will, on a quote, and that will drive me. I'll be like, my character would say that, or
Mm.
this person's character would say that, or something similar. And that can drive me. So for me, I love, love, love a good twist. And so choosing a medium or an idea that has a certain emotion, for me, a lot of times what will motivate me or excite me is flipping it.
Yeah.
So I love like the power, overcoming status quo. I love a good enemies to lover romance, because I like the flirting and kind of the opposites of attraction. So I love all of that. I love a good detective who's at their wits end with their, co-partner or their boss, or even the person who's probably guilty, but yet they can't see the guilt. Like I love all of that. So yeah, I love pushing against status quo of what's defined as is. As you can tell, I like to play with that hard black line dividing things. So for me, that will drive me in. And emotion is big for me. I'm visual. I will make mood boards with my initial ideas, and that
Mhm.
usually excites me. So yeah, it comes from all different places. Like I said, I think of myself very much as a creative overall.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting what you said about, because I'm a very visual person too. And most of my ideas, I'll be watching, I'm a terrible writer. Most of my ideas don't actually come from other books. I'll be watching TV or something and I'll hear a line of dialogue. And like you said, I'll think, oh, my character would sound like that, but I just need to like
Tweak
twist
it.
the dialogue slightly so that
Yeah.
it definitely sounds like them. But often it's that combination, or like I'll be watching a scene in a movie and the soundtrack will be playing in the background, and it's that combination of visual and audio elements that really like clicks for
Yeah.
me. And then I'll think, oh yeah, this is what my setting will be like, or this is the emotional tone of the scene that I'm writing right now. I need to recapture this. Yeah.
Yeah, I do that as I'm writing too. Like if I know my story pretty well at this point, especially for the Unwanted series, I had playlists.
Yeah.
And it's fun because, granted, I probably over listened to so many of those songs, but there are certain parts in the book that drove emotion,
Mhm.
for me to write it. And I could listen to that song on repeat, or a few songs, just to get through the chapter. And
Yeah.
sometimes I would be like a little blurby little crying mess because I had a lot of drama, and some of I killed a lot of people for young adult. But anyway,
Yeah, you did.
um, you know. Um, so yeah, I think, making playlists for yourself to elicit emotion, because I'm normally a very happy-go-lucky person. So to
Mhm.
get down in the grunge and the deep and the dark, I kind of have to put myself in those places. And music does that for me so wonderfully and so quickly, because I can just get caught up in the beat, caught up in the chorus, what I conceive as, the meaning of the songs. And that can kind of burst your bubble when you go Googling and try to find the meaning of a song, and it's like completely not what you thought. And you're like, damn it. But,
No.
Keep it to yourself.
Yeah, I would. I definitely would keep it to yourself. That's hilarious. Okay, so this is the Write Better Fiction podcast, and it's time for my favorite question of the show, so much so that I ask all my guests, and you are no exception just because we're friends. So, Cassie Newell, why do you write fiction?
Another hard question. I was like, well, this kind of dovetails into my why, right? So there you go. I write fiction because it's creative, it's informative, it's cultural, it's entertaining, and I just love stories, like full stop. What to say there. And when I'm creating, it's kind of that creation of the unproduct, right? It's that wonderful point of a blank page of nothingness to a full story, holding in your hand, creative high. It is the best feeling that you can really have. And for me, more long term, it's on the other side of that I'm leaving behind for others, hopefully impacting the way they see the world or empowering young girls, because I do have a very strong female character, and hopefully, some type of entertainment, as well, because I am a B author, and actually a legacy of my name for my family. Like, that's important to me, when I'm here and gone. So that's why. Just really quick, because it can get a little lengthier if we really dig into it, but I talk about it a little bit more in my book. But those are the key bullet points, if you will, as to why I write and why I love writing, why I write fiction.
That's awesome, and a great way to wrap up the show. So could you tell everyone a little bit about where they can find out more about you and everything that you do?
Sure. So you can find me at www.sassywritingcoach.com. At TikTok, I am at Sassy Writing Coach. On Facebook and Instagram, I'm at author Sassy Cassie. It's a little bit of a combined platform on Facebook and Instagram with my fiction author activities, as well as coaching, because I'm just short of time all the time. So it's a combo, but TikTok is mostly my coaching.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Cassie. That was great.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed the interview with Cassie and picked up a ton of actionable tips that inspire you to start writing. Join me next week when I'll be talking to sapphic fantasy romance author and Rebel podcaster Sasha Black, all about launching her new Ruby Row pen name. Sasha's a good friend of mine, so you'll get to listen to us have a laugh while learning how to launch a new pen name in what some would say is a crowded marketplace for authors. I know you'll get a ton out of it, so join me next week for that. And in the meantime, have a great writing week. Thanks for listening to the Write Better Fiction podcast. Remember to hit subscribe on your favorite podcatcher and leave a review, and we'll chat again next time.